Welcome to The Pick List, the podcast for curious food industry minds.
Every week, we bring you our pick of articles from the world of food and grocery retail and explore what they tell us about how our food industry is changing in these extraordinary times.
We chat about the major news from nationals and big trade titles, but we also love unearthing gems from niche publications and sharing brilliant, quirky food stories that change the way we think about the food we eat and produce.
I'm Julia Glotz.
And I'm Laura Ryan.
It's great to have you with us. Let's start the show.
Hi Julia, it's episode 24 of The Pick List. Are you having a good week?
Hello Laura, I'm having a very good week, thank you. Lots of training and running online courses, this time on the fundamentals of good writing. So that's been keeping me very busy. What have you been up to?
Yeah, busy week. I've been chairing more industry meetings, which are keeping me out of mischief, which is great, and pitching for some more business coming in 2021. So yeah, it's a quick run up to Christmas at the moment. We've got an amazing guest this week, haven't we?
We have indeed. We're joined by Asia Walker, who is Regional Marketing Manager at Alliance. Asia is a brilliant guest and she brings a really fantastic perspective to the various articles that we've been discussing this week.
Should we start the show?
Asia, welcome to the show. It's lovely to have you on.
Thank you for having me.
Why don't you briefly introduce yourself and tell our listeners how you're connected to food and drink?
Sure. So I work for Alliance Group. So Alliance Group are New Zealand processor and producer of lamb, beef and venison. I am regional marketing manager of UK and Europe. So I've been with the company for 2 years now. I kind of just stumbled into the job, not knowing kind of anything about the meat industry, and 2 years later, still kind of learning a lot of stuff on the way. I actually started my role kind of in like logistics / marketing, and now I do full marketing all the time.
Fantastic. And you've brought some really interesting articles for us to discuss this week as well. Why don't you tell us about your first article?
Sure. Yeah. So the first article is kind of it's to do with the big retailers. So you've got Tesco's and Asda and Lidl, Waitrose, and all of those kind of retailers, and the struggles they're having this year with kind of like Christmas slots. I think Tesco released their Christmas slots last week, and they went within like half an hour. So obviously this year a lot of people are tending to stay at home, and not a lot of people are going out into supermarkets if they're kind of have vulnerable people at home. So the Christmas slots are going very quickly, which can definitely cause some problems for people that need those delivery slots. So they're just talking about other ways that people can get their Christmas food without having to leave home, whether it's your like local butcher that does delivery, or a lot of places are doing kind of like Christmas hampers with like vegetables and meat, and you can order one of them. So it's just about like alternative ways to get your Christmas food if your local kind of like Tesco or Asda is completely full.
Yeah, it's a really interesting piece, and I think from the grocer, if I remember correctly, and I think what's so interesting here is that we've had this story throughout the pandemic, haven't we, of how we've all started switching to online. E-commerce has seen such a massive boost, and we're all much more used to buying all sorts of things, including groceries, online. And Christmas would now be the sort of natural thing, the natural focal point. We all want to be shopping online, but of course, capacity is still a massive issue. And as I think the article points out, these retailers really had to squeeze every last little bit of efficiency out of those operations already. It's not easy to just suddenly, have masses of extra capacity just because it's coming up to Christmas. So, I think it'll be really interesting to see what happens once more retailers release their Christmas delivery slots, and just how many people will ultimately be able to shop like that. For Christmas. I think click and collect, as the article alludes to as well, I think is going to play a massive role. That's what I'm banking on. I really hope I'm going to be able to do click and collect.
Yeah.
I think it's a great article from the groceries that you've brought this week, and you're right, Julia. Click and collect, and we spoke about Aldi last week trialing more and click and collect across 200 stores. Is this an opportunity for them and others to step up more? The other thing, in terms of the number of people that are potentially in the country, I was hearing from some industry contacts last week that they're hearing from their retail customers that there's going to be up to 7 million more people in the country this Christmas than normally, because unfortunately I haven't been one of these, but sometimes people go off on a nice cruise or go skiing or all the rest of it. So actually the additional demand through those retail channels, and maybe not a food service either, is going to be phenomenal. And then I guess when I'm reading the article, I'm always thinking as well as, well, who are we having around for Christmas dinner? Because we still don't know where we maybe can buy our food from, and even if you do get a delivery slot, what are you actually ordering? Because at this stage in the game, particularly if you're in England and the tiering system, and I know Scotland have just changed some of their rules this week, what's that actually going to look like, and how many people are you going to have around your table, and how big's that piece of meat that you're going to be ordering?
Yeah, I think that's definitely another question people has, is if you're only with like it's just myself and my mum, we don't want a big massive turkey because we're going to have meat for ages. You know, we're probably more likely going to go for like a medium-sized chicken. I think although people will be ordering online, they might be ordering smaller amounts than they normally would, because you're not going to have parties of 20 or 30 in your house. So I think we'll definitely see kind of a shift in kind of demand for certain products, and the amount that people normally buy. So that will be quite interesting to see, I think.
Absolutely, and it reminded me, just listening to you there, I think when M&S released some of their sort of Christmas trend predictions a few weeks ago, they talked about minimus as one of those sort of key trends, and it's exactly what you were talking about, which is, you know, smaller gatherings, people not looking for that massive centerpiece that's going to serve 8 or 10 people, but having smaller portions and potentially more variety. I mean, there are, I think, opportunities there, you know, from a meat industry point of view, but also more widely, for people to just have a wider repertoire of meats and foods, because it's not just going to be about that single big occasion. You know, you're potentially going to have smaller mini misses over the festive period, of course, if social distancing rules allow, and as you say, we still don't know exactly what the rules are going to be at this stage over the festive period. So lots of people will be waiting and seeing before committing to that Christmas slot, or committing to a big turkey purchase or otherwise.
And it's so tough for the suppliers and the retailers to be able to pivot on the advice that's going to come out over the next couple of weeks about what Christmas is going to look like. And I guess what springs to my mind is party food. You know, over the next few weeks we'd normally see gondola ends full of party food and big fixture space in freezers for it. But if there's still a restriction on the number of people in your household, then that's not a product that's going to sell particularly well. But retailers will have agreed to purchase that product. What's that going to look like, and are they going to pivot to something else that down the minimus option, which is going to be fascinating to watch. Tough time. Julia, what's your first article this week?
So my first pick this week is from The Times, and it's an article titled "Brands Struggling to Get a Handle on Woke Capitalism." It's not an article that's specifically about food or grocery, but it touches on issues that I think are relevant for brands across the board, and it does reference a few retail names in there as well. And in essence, it's looking at the difficulties that many big brands are facing in figuring out how they can meet younger consumers' desire, in particular for social activism, and brands that take a stand on important social, political, and environmental issues. How do you do that credibly as a brand, and as a big brand in particular? And the piece really caught my eye because I've recently worked on a report that's been published recently on Gen Z and how grocery brands can build meaningful relationships with them. And this challenge, you know, of being expected to take a public stand on certain issues if you're a brand now, and how to do that, it's just, front of mind for so many brands in FMCG right now, and in other sectors as well, because the stakes are so high. If you get this wrong, if you strike the wrong tone, if you're seen to be woke washing, you have a PR disaster on your hand. But then not saying anything also doesn't feel like an option. And the article has a really interesting stat in there from Edelman, the consultancy, which says 64% of people now say they have chosen or avoided a brand based on its stand on societal issues. And that's up from 51% in 2017. So there are real commercial consequences potentially for brands who ignore this. And the Times article brings some really interesting perspectives on this. One of the things it focuses on is how the pandemic has added to the pressure brands face. This idea that younger consumers, that Gen Z, are interested in these sort of socially aware brands, that's not a new trend, but COVID has really brought it into focus, because it's led consumers across the board to ask tougher questions about what lies behind the rhetoric of some of these brands and how they're actually behaving versus how they're presenting themselves in their marketing and their advertising. Are you running cutesy, feel-good adverts about, staying strong while being apart and all of that, while treating your staff horribly and making them work in conditions where they're putting their health on the line? And the article also does point out that this challenge of how to take a position on important issues credibly and authentically, that challenge isn't going away. It's something that brands will need to figure out. And there are some signs that they're definitely starting to do this, and it's partly because of pressure from investors. I was interested to see that there's a quote in there from Arthur Krebers, who's head of sustainable finance for corporates at NatWest Markets. And he talks about how reluctant and conservative certain company treasurers would have been previously on these issues. But now, he says, they're realizing that if they don't develop a proactive narrative around this that is credible and has substance, then they will start to lose out in terms of investor demand, bank liquidity, and hence cost of equity and debt. And that's been a really profound shift. So you're having these senior executives at these companies starting to draw a line between proactive stands on certain social issues and actual financial performance. So it'll be fascinating to see how this shift plays out and whether we're going to see more brands take more proactive positions and more carefully thought out positions on this in the future. But certainly I think for the time being, a really, really difficult balance to strike for brands. Some of them do this quite well. People always talk about Ben and Jerry's, and they have a sort of heritage around activism as well, which can make some of these things a little bit easier. But I think for many others, this feels like an area where they know they should be doing something and they should develop certain positions, but getting that right and managing the risk around, being seen to be woke washing, I think is really challenging. Asia, as someone who's considerably younger than me, I'm possibly exactly the kind of demographic that they're talking about when they're saying, Gen Z is looking for brands that have a real clear social stand. Is that something you're seeing? And are you seeing that is playing out within the meat industry as well, that companies, that suppliers, that brands are starting to think more about what they need to do to appeal to younger consumers?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, 2020 has been a big year, not just for coronavirus, but, we had the Australian fires in the beginning of the year. We had the Black Lives Matter movement. Although we've had kind of this whole craziness of what's happened this year, we've also seen a lot of good things come out of it. So because people weren't traveling, you had Venice that had clear blue waters because there was no boats. Australia is now starting to heal from the wild fires. You see there's not as much kind of like litter here and there because people aren't out and about and littering. And I certainly think that, especially kind of like my generation and the generations underneath kind of my age group, we are a lot more aware of things. And I think we have this whole kind of like, you might have heard of it, but there's this like cancel culture, and if our generation doesn't agree with something, we kind of cancel it as such, and people kind of say, well, don't go near that brand because, you know, their ethics aren't very good, you know, you shouldn't like support them. And even not even just by like buying things from them, but, you know, liking their Instagram post and following them on social media counts as a big thing as well. So you can see, you know, if a brand posts an advert and the advert doesn't go down well with people, they'll lose followers within like the hour. So yeah, I definitely think our generation is a lot more aware. Also, definitely in the industry, I think, especially within the meat industry, because we are up against kind of like veganism and vegetarianism. It's very kind of like we have to keep on trend, and we have to show that although we are providing these products, that we can provide them in a sustainable way. So it's just about how we portray that to people, whether it's through an infographic or a video, or kind of getting some like top influencers on board. That's kind of, I think, the route that we have to go down, and kind of showcase that we can be sustainable, even if your product is coming from far and wide. You know, we can make a difference, and we can do things like offset our carbon emission.
It's fascinating to listen to you, Asia, about, you know, the pace as well around this. You know, within the hour, social media likes and social media followings can change, and just how impactful that is. And reading the article, what struck me was this is easy for brands that have got a strong position statement, a strong strategy, and are really clear on what their values are. And the likes of Co-op and Steve Morel's, it's easy for him to come out and be very authentic about what their mission is, because it's inherent in their values. Where organisations maybe, as we've spoken about, don't maybe always have that backing and that foundation, and maybe, I guess, that their staff don't live and breathe what they're wanting to achieve. It is harder, and it doesn't feel as genuine. I was interested this week as well. I see that Morrison's and McVitie's have got a joint initiative going now, where if you buy a certain box of McVitie's biscuits, then one box gets donated to a food bank. And I wonder if that's an opportunity to maybe de-risk some of this brands doing things in isolation by partnering with retailers. And will we see more of that, where there's different organisations, brands and retailers coming together to help address this, rather than just feeling they're in isolation and thinking, you know, are we saying the right thing or doing the right thing?
Laura, what's your first pick for us?
My first pick this week is from the BBC, and it's Felixstowe Port in chaos as Christmas and Brexit loom. And I was really interested by this article, and it's also had quite a lot of coverage over mainstream media, radio, over the last couple of days. And this is basically retailers, shipping associations and the road haulage association saying Felixstowe is in chaos. And some of the folks that are shipping product into Felixstowe are now redirecting it to Rotterdam and sending product via road into the UK, and basically saying there's up to a 10-day wait to get ships docked at Felixstowe. Felixstowe are responding by saying this is pre-Brexit stockpiling and linked to the pandemic, and there's 11,000 containers of PPE coming into Felixstowe, which is challenging in terms of the capacity in there. And what really strikes me, and I think having this in mainstream press and consumers looking at it, is that challenge about Christmas product. And there's a comment within the article talking about bold cube scooters, kids scooters, and they're waiting for 5 containers to be docked. They don't know when it's going to be docked, and the date keeps getting pushed back and back. And if I was reading this as a consumer, I'd be thinking, right, there's a danger here. I might not get my kids' Christmas present if it's something that's not already in store. I'm going to maybe order now on Amazon, or go sooner on a purchase than I maybe would have done previously. And I think we always have this luxury that logistics is super complicated, and it just naturally happens to shoppers, both for fresh and food products, and also ambient products, and into other categories like toys, that we're so lucky in the UK that it's just there. And this is really triggering the fact fact that it might not be there, and into future as well there could be extra costs passed on to consumers because of the additional price shipping and logistic challenges, and also getting slots in to collect some of these goods at Felixstowe it is a challenge which could actually leave some of the goods just at quayside. So I was interested in the article, one because of the logistic challenge, but two, how much coverage this has got in mainstream press, and as a result, what's this going to do to consumer behaviour. What do you think, Asia? Have you picked this up, I guess, the market that you work in, and this is really important about how quick ships can dock, how you can get product, how quickly you can get a perishable product off them into the customer's hands. How much are you picking up of this, and what do you think it'll mean?
Yeah, I mean, it's been really tricky for our logistics guys. We've got containers that are like 10 days late, and they get to the port and they just sit on the side, especially if it's chilled product. It's a lot more, the life on it goes a lot quicker. So you're looking at kind of the retailers are calling us up saying, where's our product? And we're saying we can't do anything about it. It's not been approved by the vets, or, this kind of thing. So it is definitely frustrating because all the guys from over in New Zealand and in England here, we're all doing all the work to get the containers from New Zealand to here, and then it's kind of like the last push is where we get held up the most. So yeah, it is very frustrating. Obviously, we are very understandable of the situation, because I think with COVID it's difficult because you can't have loads of people kind of on the docks than you normally would. But I think also it's a catch-22 situation really, because you've got people like Tesco's and stuff who want their product and need their product for the customers, but then at the same time you've got the people that are working down on the dock who are saying we can't employ more people because COVID wise we need to keep them safe. And I think if there was to be a COVID outbreak there, it would just be disastrous. So almost in a way you kind of want them to carry on the way that they are, to kind of keep operating at some level, than to completely shut down. So yeah, I mean, it's I think only time will tell, because Brexit hasn't happened yet. And hopefully as kind of COVID kind of slows down a bit, they'll be able to employ a bit more people, and hopefully it will just get a bit faster in that sense. But it is kind of a bit difficult sometimes when you've got the customer ringing you up for the product, and we can't physically get it to them at the moment.
Asia, tell us about your second pick.
So my second pick is from the grocer as well, and it's about Pret and how they have decided to do kind of like dinners at home. So you can order a dinner on their app, and it will just arrive at home. I think it's things like soups and kind of like curries and kind of what they do at lunchtime, but more towards dinner time. And what I really liked about it was that Pret have always been an innovative company. So you had kind of in the summer they came up with their picnic ideas. You can order like a crudité with like hummus and vegetables, and you can actually order it to the park and have it in the park with friends. Or they had like a ploughman's pack with like cheese and chutneys and that kind of thing. So I definitely think they are going with the trends. I think what Pret have to do, Pret kind of like Starbucks and Costa, because they are located where a lot of offices are, and because offices aren't actually operating at the moment, they have to find other ways to reach their customers. So yeah, I really like the way that they kind of pivot their business to meet kind of the changing aspects of the way the world is at the moment.
They're super innovative, as you say, and God, I miss Pret. When you pick the article and you just chatting through there about the different things that they're doing, it makes me feel so hungry, because there's not that many Prets up in the northeast, and it's always a London treat. And I guess when we're looking at the article, it makes me think, are they moving into this dark kitchen model, as we've seen? A lot of folks are trying it, and as you say, they're hamstrung by the geography of if they're using Deliveroo and others, that by the trial stores that they're doing in the centre of London, by the catchment around there, and if they want to get a stronger reach, then they're going to have stores in more residential areas, as you mentioned.
I do really like just how innovative and how agile Pret have been, as you said, Aja, and I think trying out these different options, experimenting, running all sorts of trials to see how they can still reach customers and reach them on different occasions, I think is absolutely critical. What I think will be quite challenging for them is forging that association in the consumer's mind with their brand name and a dinner kind of occasion, because I think they are so well established around lunchtime. People sort of automatically think of them. What's it going to take for someone to be at home and to say, I fancy a nice dinner, I fancy a nice curry or focaccia pizza, or whatever they've got on their offering? I'm going to look for that from Pret at that sort of time of night when there are so many other options available as well. So I think that's going to be really important for them to crack, and I'll be very interested to see what strategies they employ to get people to start thinking of them for those occasions. Certainly, I think partnering with some of those takeaway delivery partners will help with that, because you're then within an ecosystem where you're potentially discoverable alongside other sort of takeaway and dinner options as well. But yeah, I'll be watching that with really great interest to see how they make that happen.
Julia, what's your second pick this week?
So my second pick this week is from Modern Retail, and it's an article titled "Why Video Games Are the Next Retail Frontier." I'm not a gamer personally, but I'm fascinated by how gaming is changing and how brands and retailers are starting to look at gaming in really quite innovative ways. Because gaming has such a mainstream appeal these days, you're also seeing a much wider range of brands and retailers working with gamers and in gaming than you would perhaps have expected traditionally. This particular article focuses on a really interesting development where we're not just seeing brands or retailers pop up in video games through product placement or sponsorship, but we're actually seeing full-scale retail businesses being launched within games and around games. The example the article focuses on is a popular apartment design game called Design a Home, where you basically get to design your own apartment and you can buy all sorts of digital furniture items for your digital apartment. But now the company behind this game has actually launched a real life sort of home accessories and furnishings company. So you can furnish your digital apartment within the game with your digital sofa and digital cushions. But if there's an item that you actually like, you can now also buy the real life version for your own real life apartment directly from within the game. So it's a really interesting tie-up of gaming and e-commerce. And there's an interesting quote also from that company where they're saying that they're basically seeing gaming increasingly as a platform for consumers to discover and engage with brands through creative play, because you're sort of experiencing the product and the brand within the context of the game. The article then goes on to look at which other games might be suited for this kind of setup. And the experts they're talking to basically say that it's simulation games such as Sims or FIFA that have particularly strong potential, because they're meant to replicate real life. So the presence of real life brands doesn't feel out of place or forced. It can actually enhance the sort of reality of the game itself. One of the challenges that still exist in this sphere that brands and retailers are still facing is around metrics. Some video games have really good metrics and really great levels of transparency around viewing figures and engagement, others less so. But there are quite a lot of efforts underway now to change that. New companies, new startups coming into the market, also looking to really bring greater clarity and usability and transparency to some of these metrics. So it feels like an area where we're going to see more and more brand activity over time. But yeah, such a fascinating idea, I think, to not just look at gaming as something where you can appear as a brand or where you might want to sponsor someone or something, but actually have that link between gaming and e-commerce, have people discover brands and products within a sort of gaming environment and then actually buy them for their real life as well. Asia, what did you make of it? Are you a gamer? Is this something that you could see yourself do?
Yeah, I mean, I play Sims. So I think it's definitely a very kind of interesting way to market your brand. If you kind of are designing your house in The Sims, for example, and you see kind of like a chair that you like, you can then like buy it in real life or something. That's kind of like I guess a cheap way for you to see how your room may look like in real life without actually having to spend the money in person to begin with. So I think gaming is definitely a huge market. You've got these YouTubers who do like streaming and stuff, and they make like lots of money. I think especially this year, if you've released a game this year, you're going to do really well because everyone's at home and all they do is spend time gaming. And I think I remember the first kind of like couple of months of lockdown back in March, you couldn't find any like PS5s or Nintendos anywhere. They were sold out because that's all everyone was doing. So I think to be like innovative and come up with something like that where you can kind of do your like run your business within a game, I think is very kind of a clever idea, because people will immediately kind of search online for it if you have kind of like a QR code or something, and they will, it's one of those things that will trend very quickly again on like Twitter and Instagram, and it can easily kind of like go viral. So if you have a good campaign in like The Sims, for example, then you're pretty set for like the rest of your like career, I reckon, because they can just like go viral very quickly, and that is the beauty of social media.
For me, because I'm not a gamer and it makes me feel really old, so it's really interesting to hear what you're saying, Asia. For me, it makes me realise you've got to make sure your marketing team understands where your customers are, what they're doing, and how you can communicate with them in different ways like this, and always look to evolve. As you said, this is something that feels like influencers the next step, rather than on Instagram where you can swipe up to purchase. Well, actually you're building your own ecosystem then to buy from that. It feels a lot more natural and maybe lowers the barriers to entry as well. So absolutely fascinating, and making sure that all this technology evolves into benefits for businesses.
And I think the point you just made there, Laura, I think is key, that as brands, as marketing teams, I think it's so important to make sure that you sort of look beyond yourself and your own media habits as well. I mean, that was something that really came through when I did my research for that Gen Z report that I wrote. You hear from marketers say it can be a real challenge actually to sort of not base these decisions purely on your own media habits and feel like, I don't play games, so this doesn't feel intuitive, or to just look at what your kids are doing, as opposed to saying, no, I need to take a really kind of data-led approach here and have a look at the figures, make sure I understand where the audience is. These might be forms of media consumption that don't appeal to me, that don't feel intuitive to me. That's not how I game, that's not how I use my mobile phone. But that doesn't mean that there aren't huge groups of consumers, and particularly younger consumers, that are doing exactly that. And you need to be there, and you need to kind of know how to engage with them, because otherwise your sort of brand awareness levels are just going to fall off a cliff at some point, because you're not going to be in front of that next generation of shoppers. Laura, what's your second article for us?
My second article this week is via NAM News, and it's a research piece from Mintel, and it's opportunities for lockdown 2.0. And as we know, here in England, are we halfway? Feels like we're halfway through a lockdown. We're almost there, hopefully. And this is a few hints and tips about how businesses, particularly in the retail sector, can benefit, and what they can look at as we're in lockdown again. And they make a couple of key points which I thought would be of interest to chat through. First of all, maintained habits they talk about. And this is all about the online shift, and we've seen it tremendously, haven't we? And we've spoken about it on today's show, how folks are buying more and more, particularly food online, and how that's not going to stay, that's going to stick. And as we've spoken about, Christmas is a case in point that the slots have gone. In terms of Christmas, it will create potential for remote gifting and tailored products for subscription models such as wine and chocolate. And that's really interesting, that, particularly for independent retailers and some of the big players players as well that wouldn't traditionally have a mail order service using as a gift. It offers a huge opportunity, the Mintel report states. There's also a piece, and it loops back to the conversation we've just had around Boost Digital and the Zoom boom, and the fact that we're buying more and more tech, and also tech purchases maybe in the past, so be that TVs or mobile phones, we would want to see them. We would want to go in store and have that tangible experience to see what the functionality was like and all the rest of it. Whereas now, and it reminds me a little bit about like meat research, previously people wouldn't buy a steak unless they could feel it. They were happy to buy mince online, but they wanted to pick their own steak. Exactly the same as tech, because these retailers are closed, they're happy actually to make the leap and make tech purchases online. And some of these players are upgrading their functionality of online experience. And then finally, the point that was also interesting was about Amazon's benefiting, and boy, do we know Amazon is benefiting from lockdown, but also these small retailers are fighting back. And I was really intrigued that the Mintel report pulls out that they're fighting back by coming together, and it pulls out a couple of examples. Firstly, independent bookstores. They've set up bookshop.org so they can combine resources and online events. And then also music shops have a record store day later this month, again, where independents can come together and champion. Because I guess when you're an independent small player, to have social media cut through and I guess to get through to consumers that you don't normally have is really tough. So that grouping has helped. Asia, what do you think of some of these lockdown 2.0 options, and I guess for you, what stuck for you that you maybe you've alluded to there about gaming and that sort of thing? Do you think that's things that will stick and will remain, or will we let go of them once we're out of this lockdown?
Yeah, I think definitely with lockdown 2.0, people have kind of already got their like own routines of how they did things back in lockdown 1.0. So, they would go on their daily run or play a PC game or something like that. I think we did see a change when we were allowed to go out and do things. People didn't necessarily spend a lot of time at home, so they weren't necessarily reading a book as much as they should or playing a PC game. We were more interacting face to face with people. I think things like, obviously, right in the beginning of lockdown back in March, we had a lot of Zoom parties and Teams parties and quizzes and things like that. And I think this time round, we're not necessarily doing that so much. So I definitely think over time, things will kind of start to fade, and people will find new things to do during lockdown. And definitely, I think once lockdown kind of officially ends and we can go out like shopping or to the park, or like to the park with more people than we can now, or to like restaurants, the cinema and things like that, I do think we will kind of slowly get back into like normal life again. And things that we are doing at this moment in time, we probably won't do you know anytime soon, unless we sadly have to go into another lockdown. I think also there is kind of like a mental connection there, whereas people don't want to do the same things that they're doing in lockdown in the future, because it reminds them of being in lockdown. And sometimes it's not a good experience for people, which is unfortunate, because they don't necessarily, they're working from home by themselves, or they don't have family close by. So I think a lot of people will maybe not stick to the things that they've been doing, because it reminds them of a time that wasn't very great for them. So yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see what happens kind of over the next month or two, and see what new kind of trends we adapt and get into, really.
I think it's such a good point, actually, about how we may very well be wanting to deliberately move away from some of the stuff that we did during lockdown. So, are we perhaps going to see almost a backlash against some of that sort of very digitally focused behavior? Are we going to be so hungry for real life interaction, for going into a store with like great in-store theatre, or are we going to stick with some of those digital habits for a little bit longer? I imagine it's probably going to end up somewhere in between, with a mixture of both. But I think it's really interesting. It's an interesting question to raise, to see exactly how much is going to stick. I think from a kind of, brand point of view and supplier point of view, the point that was raised in the Mintel research and the article that you picked, Laura, about some of the sort of digital habits, I think is really interesting. The sort of digital gifting, but also looking at how we're sort of changing our buying habits to really specifically support independence as well. I think that does have the potential to change some of our habits longer term. And the point that you raised about, people wanting to pick a steak, for instance, in store and not necessarily being that comfortable picking it online. I think once you've gone through the experience of picking it online and actually it's fine and you're happy with it, that's something that I think you're going to take with you, and that's going to sort of change the way you think about certain categories from then on in. But yeah, really interesting to think about lockdown 1.0 versus lockdown 2.0 and how our attitudes have changed. Personally, I've certainly found this one much harder, even though it's less strict. And I think part of that is possibly to do with the time of year. Part of it might be to do with sort of, it feels like, oh, here we go again. but it definitely does feel like it's got a slightly different feel to it compared with what we experienced during the first lockdown.
It's a great point you make, and I think, not to be too British about it, the weather, and as much as we love talking about the weather, is a massive factor. The fact that it's not light till 7:30 in the morning and it's dark at 4:30. They talk about a lot, don't they, the impact of vitamin D and the importance of it. Then it does change our mood and how retailers try and keep us moving forward within that. And part of our journey is really important.
Ada, it's been brilliant to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been really good. Not something I've done before, but something else to tick off my list.
We've loved having you.
That's all we have for you this week. Thank you so much for listening.
You can find links to the articles we discussed in the show notes at thepicklist.co.uk.
If you enjoyed our show, please subscribe, give it a rating and leave a review. It makes a massive difference to our podcast and helps us reach more people in the food industry who'd enjoy listening to The Pick List.
Thanks again for listening. See you next time.